This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
So it's a great pleasure to welcome Joelle Proust from the Institut Jean-Nicot in Paris. She's also a Director of Research at the École Normale Supérieure, CNRS Gold Medal winner as well.
No,
Gold, sorry, bronze. So we're all Olympians on that, so wonderful, thank you. And also, Joelle comes from a philosophy background that has been doing a great many things in interdisciplinary areas for the last decade and more, and has been a holder of very many major interdisciplinary project grants. So she seemed like one of the best people to come and talk to you today. She has had and led an interdisciplinary ESF research project on metacognition as a precursor to self-consciousness, and her work on metacognition has really, I think, elevated the topic and the discussion of that area into something which has been taken very seriously by philosophers, by neuroscientists, and has led to collaboration, but also looking at animal research. It's been a very, very important place where we're looking at creatures whose cognition is different from ours, but who nevertheless seem to have an ability to use or guide or have some sort of reflection without language. So most importantly, I think, of the combination of her work was the being awarded a multi-million euro grant, an advanced AHRC grant for her project Divided Metacognition When Epistemic Norms Conflict. And sparing her blushes, I'll tell you that Joelle has led this multidisciplinary team of comparative and developmental psychologists, neuroscientists, anthropologists, philosophers, and has always been regarded by the others as one of the most successful leaders of interdisciplinary teams. It's tough, but you have done it in such a way that the people who've worked with you always sing your praises. And so, knowing the difficulties and the successes, I thought it would be great to have you come here today and talk to us before you begin on a large grant, to know what it's like to be running and coordinating on a large grant. So, Joelle, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. I feel very embarrassed by your very nice comments. I am on my little cloud, as we say in French. I don't know whether you have this expression in English too. I'm going to be very practical about interdisciplinarity and tell you about how myself I have conducted interdisciplinary research. What are the general issues that I had to solve to present interdisciplinary projects and solve the various difficulties that are associated to them. So that's what I will talk to you about very concretely, how to write a project. Maybe for most of you it will be useless because you already know how to write projects and that's why you're here. But still, I think it may be good to rehearse the qualities that need to be present in the written project and also in the conception of an interdisciplinary project for it to be successful. So I will start with, I have added this. I will add just a slide on my personal interdisciplinary style. I think it was very useful for you to do it. And then present briefly my project, Divid Norm. Then see various general issues. And I will conclude with the very big problems, the main problems that need to be solved when you are conducting an interdisciplinary project. So for my profile, I had initially an education both in philosophy, which was my major, and also in experimental psychology. And I think this starting point, having two fields, just like for Andreas, it's something that motivates you for the rest of your life to understand the bridges that you can build between the fields of knowledge. And then I was lucky enough to be in the late 70s, you see, it's not last decade. I was in Berkeley, UCB, and it was the time when the Sloan Foundation was disbursing a lot of money to organize interdisciplinary conferences and so on, and it was, for me, a wonderful time when I discovered exactly what I was looking for, how to connect philosophy of mind and science. And then I was lucky enough to be recruited as a researcher at CNRS, which I had been already for a few years. I was recruited in CREA, which is now Institut Jean Nicot. It's the same unit, we had to change names for historical reasons. Complex, I will not come to that. But we have been, all from the start, we have been an interdisciplinary unit. And at the start there were economists, brilliant economists like André Orléans, for example, or Dupuis also, who is a great intellectual, and philosophers, and there were also linguists. There was Dan Sperber, a major source of inspiration. And all of these people who were working together had the same colloquium, and this was extremely helpful, I think, for our intellectual development. And then I was lucky to conduct interdisciplinary research at the national level. I mean, we had national grants at the time. And I did it with Marc Janot, a well-known neuroscientist, unfortunately deceased now. And Janot and I, we did several things together. We worked on schizophrenia, and we had substantial results, which were both important at the level of science and at that of philosophy. That is, it really helped us understand the structure of action and the self-awareness of action in a way that no prior study could ever have fancied, because we had these results from schizophrenia where the action is the center of the problem. And more recently, I had these two interdisciplinary projects that Barry alluded to. So that's how I became myself, a bit like Andreas, more or less very focused on interdisciplinarity, both for myself, but also as an advisor at several levels in France, CNRS and others. Now, I will start with briefly presenting my project called Divided Metacognition When Epistemic Norms Conflict, which is the present project, and I found on internet this image of old males which represent the norms, and they were supposed to represent norms more or less in a cross-cultural way, which is exactly what the project wants to do. We want to provide a naturalistic explanation of epistemic norms, that is, the informational dimensions that are relied upon in predicting and evaluating success, cognitive success, in a first-order cognitive action. For example, when you try to remember, you have to follow a norm of accuracy, because if you are not accurate in your remembering, you're not remembering at all. So we are interested in this kind of activity where people are using norms without even knowing that they do, simply because it's the norm that regulates the current cognitive activity they are performing. So it may be discriminating, essentially, it can be remembering, it can be reasoning, or it can be negotiating, where they try to be consensual. All these situations allow them to be sensitive to norms, even though they don't have even the words for these norms. And part of the project is to explain the differential sensitivity to these norms across cultures, within, though, a realist approach of norms. So, for example, it's widely acknowledged that in Asia, people are much more sensitive to consensus than Europeans are. But on the other hand, they are perfectly able to be sensitive to accuracy if they are doing math. So it's not that they ignore accuracy or truth, it's simply that they don't use it exactly in the same context as we do. So the methods that I'm insisting on that because I think it's very important, especially in the humanities, where people do not always realize that they are using methods, because these methods seem to go without saying. They are part of what it is to conduct a study. But when you are in an interdisciplinary project, it is important that you become self-reflective about your methods. And actually, these methods, when you become self-reflective about them, will grow and differentiate. Maybe you will find out that there are several ways of approaching the problem, even within your own field. So in our particular project here, the methods include conceptual work, because we need to, for example, determine what the norm is, and that's mainly philosophers' work. We need to distinguish standards of acceptance of a strategic kind or an epistemic kind, which is different approaches of acceptance, different kinds of norms. So that's conceptual. We also have a lot of experimental study to conduct to assess metacognition in young children and see whether they are able to control and monitor their the truth of what they say or what others say, the coherence of what they say, the consensual aspect of what they say, and so on. So this is an experimental study. It's done on children in our project, also in adults, in methods that are maybe behavioral and fMRI for adults. And we do this in Europe versus in Japan. And finally, we have a third sort of method, which is anthropological, cognitive anthropological methods, which include observation of people in rural Madagascar and how their own particular norm sensitivity appears in natural situations, such as meetings of the elders in the village to determine if someone was violated some rule, how should he be punished, and so on. So here in public discussions you can see what are the epistemic norms they are following, on top of social norms and other things like that. And we also conduct experiments here, just like Rita Astuti has shown we could do, also in Madagascar, also with Maurice Bloch, as is also in this project. So we had, and I tell you this not for my own project, I don't think it's so much of interest to you, but to see at which level of detail you should go. I think it's more convincing to have a project that is very integrated and which includes constraints, self-imposed constraints. How shall I deal with my object? And here we have two self-imposed constraints, which were, of course, justified by the nature of the problem. The first was norm sensitivity is best assessed in procedural metacognition, that is in practical situations where people have to decide what to do, rather than to speak about what they know or don't. Because it was found that actually children are very notoriously bad before 4 years and a half to say what if their own credences are true or not. Well, they're not. You know, they don't know when they just had false beliefs. They can't report about false beliefs as such, but they can do it procedurally. So this was led for us to use only procedural metacognition in all our studies. And the second self-imposed constraint was that we would study norms in conflict. That we would set up conflicts to better understand what the subject wants to do. If you only offer a task with one norm, you don't know what he wants to do. So you need to offer him a choice, and that's why we have this second self-imposed constraints. So a brief look at the participants. In philosophy, I still am with my students, especially my doctoral student Anne Coubret. In neuroscience, we had two neuroscientists that you may know, because they have already published a lot, in particular Julie Grèze, who is a specialist on emotions, and also mirror neurons and so on, with their students and postdocs. In development, we have two teams. Why two teams? And I think it may be interesting for you to know that these two teams have different theoretical backgrounds. Beate Sodian comes from the theory of mind Pernerian school, that is a priori hostile to metacognition in children who are less than 4.5. And we have another team in Geneva, in Neuchâtel in Switzerland. Fabrice Clément and his group is more the Sperberrian. He's more interested in social situations and is more open to the idea that there might be implicit forms of metacognition. Well, I can say that Beate is not open because she has no results about that. And finally, we have Maurice Bloch, who is our anthropologist and his postdoc. So let's come to general issues, aside from my project. The first issue is determining a topic. And if you're here, it's that you know how to determine a topic. The topic must be innovative and risky. That's why it's found of higher value. You know, institutions prefer to take risks because they know that even if the project is not entirely successful as initially planned, still the fact that you have determined a new field of research by itself brings back a lot of feedback that may be very important for yourself and for others. A second, well, that's kind of well known and I will not build on it. Let me still add something. A very prominent researcher in the world, I mean at the world level, in my domain of metacognition, failed a research grant against all odds. How could he fail? He's so good, so it was simply that he was too much in continuity with his prior work. So I think this deserves to be pondered because it's really very important to be innovative. Maybe it's also, it can bring with it itself some some effects that are not wanted, side effects. But that's the way the institution now go everywhere. The choice of partners is important, and for you it's a step that you've already done. So you can go back, I suppose, at this time. But still, it's important to know that each partner should contribute pieces of knowledge. That's something that Andrea said also, that are needed by other partners. So that also goes with what Beris told you about reciprocity. It must not be business as usual, and I must say that many interdisciplinary projects were well known for that. Everyone was staying in the lab as usual, was just receiving financing, and he would do nearly the same thing as usual. So that's not at all what is expected by the institutions, and I think you would be disappointed too if you were confronted with this kind of business as usual situation, which is extremely disappointing because you were expecting intellectual stimulation and you get nothing out of it. It sometimes happens. So a second point for the choice of partners is that, of course, you should choose innovative relations with partners. For example, a non-innovative relation is for a psychologist to talk to a neuroscientist. It may be very important, but it's not innovative. But bringing together people who have never worked together as a profession, I think that's extremely interesting, and it really engages a unity knowledge that was not present before. Now, a practical matter. I cannot advise you too strongly to discuss both the topic you are going to address together and the methods which each contributor will use to deal with his part in very great detail before submitting the project. And when I say before, it's several months before you are at the step of writing it. I made a mistake once, and I left a partner decide what could be good to experiment on the project I had in mind. Because he was such a better experimenter than I was. So I left him propose, and he didn't propose anything. But of course I could not anticipate that until it was finally too late. So I had only a few days to make for what he didn't do, and of course it was one failure, and I think it's the single failure I had, but it was a bitter one, so I want to share that with you. Make sure that you discuss the sub-projects, because of course the sub-projects must be detailed enough for the jury to accept your project. Everything must be detailed, not only your part as a PI, but also your participants must have projects that are quite detailed. Now, the presentation. There is a structure. Sorry if I am here entering too much in things that you certainly know, but maybe some of you will find it useful, because there is a kind of obliged structure of a proposal. And this structure is often not known by people from humanities. So here is the structure. First, you have to have a full name and an acronym for your proposal, of course. Second, you have to determine the objective of your proposal in very brief terms, like 5 lines, but very informative. So this needs, some work. And then comes what is called the state of the art. This must include the important results in your respective fields, and the problem still unsolved, with, in particular, the target problem that the project wants to address. And what I think is important here is to realize how difficult this state of the art is to write when you are several disciplines engaged. When it's one, it's already something difficult to do, because you have to be strategic, to show that you know perfectly well what the others have done, even those you disagree with. The state of the art must reflect everything that is known concerning the subject, including the various controversies. So it must reflect it, but if there are several fields, the several approaches to the common object must be present in the state of the art. And now, of course, a very important conclusion of the state of the art is that your project is able to solve a problem that no one has managed either to formulate or to solve. So now comes the moment where you have to argue why your new ideas, your new evidence, your new methods will be able to solve the target problem. And you must say also not only in theory why you think you have a good entry to the problem, but you must also say why what you have done until now is of a kind that should make other people trust you when you say that you can do it. Then, when you have completed the part, the state-of-the-art part, and proved, opened the target problem in the sense you wish, then you need to articulate the various research questions that you will use to solve this problem, this target problem. These research questions, I will talk a little bit more about them later. I want to say that these research questions must go with a work plan and a description of what is called the deliverables, that is the various publications, articles, and books, also possibly conferences, and all the things that you will do to propagate your knowledge. This is also something that the institutions are now very, very careful about. They don't want a project to be only a matter of experts. They want these projects to disseminate. And there is a part called expected outcomes that is important to convince a jury of the value of the project. It's not something that your project will do, but it's the openings, the consequences that it will have, either at the level of the theory or at the societal level. So it can be the theoretical developments that your project will permit later on. And that's a very short section, but still you must have it. And a societal and technological sketch of the consequences, you know. I will present you briefly an example. So there is something to be kept in mind, that the project will be assessed in general by an interdisciplinary jury. I don't know if it's the case for yours, but if it's the case, then the state of the art must be legible by a non-specialist. So that's again something very difficult, because you must prove that you know all the field, even in its technical details, while not losing the reader into things he doesn't understand at all. So there must be some measure of technicalities, but not too much. So the state of the art must be informative, it must be exhaustive in its essential elements, but intelligible by non-specialists. It must be also crisply written, that is, it must be interesting to read as if it was an article. And it must allow the problems to emerge and to motivate the jury, you know, the jury to say, yes, this is an interesting problem that needs to be researched about. So there is this motivational aspect of your text that must not be forgotten without falling into the extreme, as I saw some colleagues do, say, I'm the best, and by voting for me, you will vote for science or something like that. No, but still there is some amount of, you know, motivation that must transpire from your description. Now I come back to the research questions, as I think it's really the center of the project, and I think you said so in your presentation this morning. It's the very definition of the research questions, how they are strategic for the problem you want to raise, that really contributes the most to the evaluation of the jury. So there are two things. Of course, the research questions, given that you are interdisciplinary in your project, they are usually addressed with different methods, but these research questions must be integrated and contribute to answer general issues. So there is again a tension, which really reveals the interdisciplinary character of your project. Well, I will just give my own example. It's not to boast about my research questions, it's simply I want to explain what I mean by integration. I had 6 research questions, but as you will see later, research questions themselves are big topics, and they have to be divided further. And you need to be very precise about the subdivisions as well, because the subdivisions will be helpful to construct your report. You will have to construct your financial report and your scientific report, and both of them will use the subsection of the research sections of the research questions to structure your report. You will say, well, point 2A has been done, 2B, no, it's been delayed. You know, if you don't have these references, then it will be much less easier to present your results. So just to give a few examples, what are epistemic norms? That is the naturalization issue. That's a philosophical problem. It's a monothematic, monofield problem. But as soon as you get to R2, which representational medium for norm-sensitivity is that emotion or concepts? And that involves philosophy and knowledge in cognitive science. R3 is how does sensitivity to epistemic norms develop? That involves developmental psychology, also philosophy of mind. It has also intersections with mind reading and so on. So every question is integrated in the sense that although it's generally done by one team, the outcome will concern all the others. So what, for example, is found in development will help people who work on metacognition in adults to understand why adults have this particular sensitivity. And also it will help us understand the anthropology of it. Given that we have people in Madagascar who work on a different sensitivity to norms, this integration will be very helpful for writing articles ultimately. So, as I was telling you a minute ago, research questions should be further subdivided into sub-projects, experiments, and scientific goals. And they are used to state not only the various sections of your financial reports, but also the deliverables. You can say that this book has to do with question 5C, for example. And I told you about the deadlines and so on that also are used based on the research questions. Now I come to this last paragraph of your presentation, of your project, societal and technological developments. So the question is your research potentially helpful to address concrete issues such as education, public health, societal problems, cross-cultural differences, or particular technological applications? In humanities, people are more or less convinced that no. What they do is purely, literature or things like that. It's not true at all. Actually, there is much more to be done from our projects than we ourselves are ready to do. And so it demands some imagination, but without stretching your mind either. I think it's often the case that there are important applications. Let me give you an example of my own project. I said, and I think I am able to maintain, that it can be used to contribute to the development of new educational technologies by exploring the specific patterns of epistemic norm sensitivity in children of a given school age and background. So I think it's quite evident that if we find out that children do not understand truth as adults do, and even adults don't understand truth as philosophers do, I should say, this has to be taken in consideration when thinking about a certain particular course, or in particular certain form of reasoning and so on. I think also research can enhance plasticity in epistemic norm sensitivity, both in children and adults, in particular by the use of video games based on metacognition. So that's what I'm trying to do now. There is in AHRC a sub-application possible called proof of concept, where you can apply for an additional grant to start a technological product. But unfortunately, there is a TVA problem. How do you call TVA in English? A tax problem. VAT. Because Europe doesn't reimburse VAT. And if we develop a product, we need to have experts work, private societies work on part of it, and 20% of VAT will not be taken care of, so I don't see how we can come around this problem. But that's not yours, at least. But see, the technological developments are a terrific extension for a project. Even though you don't conduct it, it's important to quote it. So now my final section is the main problems to be solved. First, this was discussed briefly earlier, there are dominance relations between fields. And actually, the dominance relations are not the same if you're in humanities or in science, it's not clear to me, at least, what the dominant field is for you. If you include scientists in your group, who is the dominant? I have no idea. You must know, I'm sure. Well, let's first imagine that the PI does not belong to the dominant field. Well, for example, a philosopher in France, when he is a PI, and he works with scientists, he is not the dominant, right? So what are the problems to be expected in that case? Well, first, he's not sure at all that the dominant will complete his part or part as expected. And in extreme cases, he can do something entirely different, or even withdraw completely from the project. And I think this is a primate problem. It's not particularly a science. If you're a dominant somewhere, you do what you want. And that's exactly what sometimes or often happens. And a second, less remarkable defection is that the dominant will not make the necessary efforts to learn or use a foreign terminology or to learn the new facts that he should command to be really in a position to cooperate with you. So that's a serious difficulty, but you must be prepared to confront it, because that's how things are in human groups. And so you should be prepared to maybe encourage your dominants in the group to cooperate if you can. Now, if the PI belongs to the dominant field, there are also problems to be expected. That is, he or she may not sincerely recognize the value of other methods for approaching the subject, which is a tendency for a dominant field, to believe that they have the more information than anybody else, and if others have information, it's of a secondary kind, or something that is for their footnotes, but not for their main text. And the second risk is that the PI may not, in retrospect, when he explains what he's done, pay due credit to the contribution of other fields to the definition of his own or her own research project. So that's not reciprocity. That's exactly what you were describing. And I think the absence of reciprocity is really directly related to field dominance. So we must be aware of it. You must be responsible for it too if you are the dominant. And if you are not the dominant, I think you need to be aware of the problem to be able to overcome it. Another problem that is serious for philosophers, I don't know about you, but there is the problem of postdoc careers and publishing. Postdocs, philosophers at least, who are recruited in interdisciplinary projects may have interest not to publish in interdisciplinary journals, but rather to concentrate on their own field in order to have convincing CVs. A strong CV in philosophy should not include a paper published in Consciousness and Cognition or something like that, because it's a stain for certain departments. If you're a good epistemologist, you never published in a journal for psychology. Never. So it's a serious problem, and I've had 4 philosophers, postdoctoral researchers across the years. None of them has published a paper with me. None of them. And this is, for me, a fact, a very disappointing but puzzling fact. And I've decided not to appoint philosophers again. That's a rational conclusion. They do not collaborate, why should I? But I understand also why they do this. They do this, they have serious reasons not to collaborate, because it would really lessen their chances to be recruited in a traditional philosophy department. Given that there are not very many philosophy departments that are open to interdisciplinary research, you cannot really reproach them to have the rational strategy they do. Another thing to notice is that the research questions need to be discussed in detail with each contributor, along with the methods to be used. I already told you that before, but I think it's very important to do so because if you don't do that, then the probability is that people will do business as usual and finally not interact together, because it's more costly to do so. So if possible, all the contributors should agree with the entire organization of the research inside the project, and they should make their expectations explicit. Another difficult subject is author order. We'll discuss this briefly. This needs to be negotiated as soon as possible. You don't expect the moment when the paper is written to decide who is going to be first, second, or third order. Given there are several people in an interdisciplinary project, things must be very clear to prevent bitterness or resentment to develop. Okay, well, I think I told you what I wanted. Thank you.
We've got plenty of time for questions, so maybe I want to probe some of those things. Fiona.
Thanks very much for your talk. I wanted to ask you about the section where you were talking about the applications of the research to, you mentioned in particular, societal and technological developments. I wasn't sure to what extent you were telling us that in that section you would just be pointing to developments that could arise from it, as opposed to sort of promising that you would sort of carry out.
No, that's the first interpretation. That is, you will not do it, but the jury must know that once this research will be performed, then there will be new opportunities for, using this knowledge in either a theoretical way or a societal way or a technological way. So I think it's part of what is expected when you write a project to have these few lines. It's generally a paragraph, not more than that, with a few, items like here I had 3, I think, that kind of thing. It must not be too long, it must not be too short. It must be something that you have really thought about, but you don't commit yourself to do so. You're not the person who will conduct either the research or the societal applications, so you're not in the position to do that anyway. But if you make available to others whose work it is to do something about either public health or living together or things like that, then it's important to mention it.
I'll ask another question. So I liked your thought of subdividing the research questions, and then you said you sort of linked those to deliverables. I suppose I think it's always quite difficult to say in advance what those are going to be. So do you have any tips and hints for how to do that?
I think your project must be quite firm. You're going to do this and that, and it must be rational. It's not something you invent. But if, while conducting the project, you realize that these deliverables should be authored by different people than you had thought first, or then it's very easy to tell your officer, the person in charge of the project, that you have made this decision to change. And it happens all the time in a project. But at the level of the project itself, you must be clear about what you will do, even if you change your mind afterwards, you see? Of course, it must be also something plausible. It's very important that it corresponds to things that you honestly believe you can do. But you cannot foretell everything that will happen. And so you may either change the deadlines of this subsection or not, or other, or you may change the organization of the collaboration for this or that. So it's completely acceptable.
So, thank you very much. It was interesting that both talks focused on power relations in the teams. And I was interested in the way you were talking about field dominance. And did you say that dominance will always, if you have a scientist, the scientist will always be the dominant?
No, on the contrary. I said that it entirely depends on your academic context. And it depends on the organization of the institution for how it works for you. Maybe in projects that are mainly humanity-oriented, maybe humanities will be dominant there. I have no idea. But you must know, certainly, because of your prior experience with your colleagues, you know who has the lead, who decides what to do, who is more reluctant to follow, and things like that. That may be indications. But of course, it's in the actual concrete development of the project that you realize who actually is powerful here.
It's just interesting when you were suggesting that PI might not be the dominant.
Yes, well, as a philosopher, I am often in that situation, not to be a dominant, and it also creates problems with whom you are able to associate with. Because simply they are dominants who are so dominant that they do not want to have anything to do with you because they have their own thing, you know, also. So it's rational for somebody who has a very big, huge lab and very successful. They are not going to lose time to do something that is a bit, you know, on the side. So they will not even accept to collaborate. But there are people who are not in that position, but still very powerful and that accept to collaborate with you, but they are really, you know, really not completely willing to devote too much energy into it. So that's clearly a question of how successful they are, you know, how big they are, how many people work for them, and so on.
I think that's a very important point, and also you all who have made it through didn't make the mistake that some applications that didn't make it through made, of thinking, well, it will enhance the project just to stick the name of a rather eminent scientist on, but could demonstrate in no way what this person would do. And when you find out what the person's actually doing, you think, oh, they have 5% of FTE now left to divide up, and maybe they'll give 1 or 2 FTE if you're lucky. And it was pretty obvious that the person was not going to contribute. So it's important not to window dress. You have to make sure the people that you are working with are really going to be collaborating.
And also another issue which is related is that if you are not the dominant and still you are the PI, the idea is yours. You had this fantastic idea, the opinion, and you need people to work on it. So it's your idea and you are begging people to work on it. So you are anyway in a situation of asking help from others. So why would people help you? You know, there is this science politics, which is that once you have your field, you go on working on your own paradigm. You're not going to change your paradigm. And so it's a real problem if you want to work with prominent neuroscientists, for example, that you are going to ask help we've never worked together. I'm not mentioning that in my talk. I know. You need to have help from neuroscience to clarify something in your, for example, here on metacognition. Neuroscientists do not give a damn for metacognition. They have not heard of it. That's a problem of philosophers. So we are here trying to find somebody who is willing to work for us, which is really irrational for them to do so because they have their own research and so on. So we are in a situation that is really extremely difficult. And I really found over there it's much easier to join a project that is offered by a neuroscientist than to ask a neuroscientist to join you on your project. Because for them it's just like the postdocs, although they may not care, but still they have their own CV, all these experiments that have to do with the same topic over the years, and suddenly comes metacognition. Why is this? Why would he want to work on metacognition? So the way out is to look for younger colleagues who are not yet completely identified with the subject, or whose subject overlaps with your own, which is the case for my two neuroscientists. One is working on gaze direction, and the other is working on emotions. And it turns out that metacognition, in its procedural forms, are both sensitive to gaze and to emotions. So it's a piece of luck. But really, that requires some thinking when you decide to work with a very dominant field.
Yes.
Do you think these power relations therefore need to be negotiated in the way you're suggesting in order to achieve precisely the reciprocal relations that we were talking about at the beginning? It seems to me that the two are very closely related, but that actually what you've shown is a kind of problematic in just assuming that reciprocal relations will happen.
Well, reciprocity, I think that was the conclusion of Andreas. Andreas was extremely skeptical. He said, no, it's impossible, he says.
Almost impossible.
Well, I think reciprocity is a matter of persuasion, too, of the person who came up with the idea. You must convince your partners that what you propose is going to be very important for them, you know. But again, there is always this ambivalence of people who are already settled in a career with their own subject matter, and who need to deviate to collaborate with you. And this is no good for them. Especially in my field of metacognition, which is the procedural type of metacognition, which is a kind of threat for the mind-reading people. And people like Beatrice Odian, she is between two chairs, you know. So it's a difficult subject for people who are already established. And even for younger people, when it's a topic that is a bit contentious like this, after all, they are not sure that they will be reinforced in their decision to collaborate. Maybe they will have results that will not bring them fame or you know.
Helen and Patrick.
I'm being exercised by a particular problem, and I just wondered whether you had any advice. So the way that the application procedure works, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone from the AHRC, is that although it eventually goes to a kind of interdisciplinary panel, before that it will go to referees, and you know, who knows who those referees will be. For example, in my case, right, you know who they are, right. Listen very carefully in. Those people who think that publishing interdisciplinary journal is a stain on a CV, you know, one of those might be refereeing my application, right? I don't know whether the application will be refereed by a philosopher of mind, someone who does metaphysics, someone who does jurisprudence, you know, who knows. So it's a very difficult, the audience, the potential audience is a very mixed one, where on the one hand you've got a kind of panel where you can assume that there will be various disciplines covered and people will be basically signed up to the idea of a disciplinary project. Whereas when it comes to the referees, it's entirely possible that we'll get subject specialists who know a lot about a bit of the project and nothing about the rest. So it's very difficult to know what level to pitch it at, if you see what I mean.
Well, I think the referees will be selected by the jury in a way that is not, opposing its own aims. So they will not. I don't know your jury at all. I'm just thinking in general how it works for the European Research Council, the European Research Council or the ESF would be quite willing to give all the chances to a project. So they don't want the project to be demolished for ideological reasons. So given that we are in an interdisciplinary context, the reviewers will be people who have been already known to be inclined to accept an interdisciplinary viewpoint on the question they are to judge about. So I don't think it's.
I think it was also true that when the panel gets together, and at the beginning of the panel meeting, we had virtually a kind of prayer meeting re-incantation of the terms of the call, so that I ended up not having to say them anymore. People they were coming out of everybody else's mouth. It was good. So that we did not always go by the individual report if we felt it wasn't sensitive to the call. And that's what makes panels important. Otherwise, you could just compute the scores. You could weigh that. I think rather different. You think so?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is we're aiming to get around about 5 peer reviews.
That makes it better actually.
So because we know that they're going to be interdisciplinary applications. Now, the issue with interdisciplinary reviews is you're not going to be able to find someone who's got the expertise in all those areas. We're going to try and get as good a match as possible, but hopefully by getting 5, we kind of means that those kind of prejudices kind of get reduced, and the kind of the panel who will have to kind of, as Barry said, have the incantation about the aim of the scheme. We were sending the aims of the scheme to the reviewers anyway, and we're signing that beforehand, so that they're kind of showing a willingness to kind of be involved in the first place. Should hopefully mean that we don't get people who are, if they're only interested in philosophy, going, yes, obviously I want to get involved in a science and culture review application. So I think people who are willing to sign up to it will have an element of acceptance of that interdisciplinarity being the driver.
But it also may happen that a reviewer has his own personal interests in the project. I mean, it happens one of the projects I was applying before, that one of the reviewers was extremely critical about everybody except his own group. And of course it was not known it was his group, but it appeared, and finally he was totally disqualified, and his opinion was not taken into account at all. So this also...
everybody knows this proposal has some good points to it, but it just doesn't do enough to mention Professor X, and you just know that's Professor X. People know that on panels, and they might find out. But Andres wanted to say something, then Patrick, and then Ian, do you want to talk on this specifically?
Yes, sorry, just say because I want to add, but there is a right to apply stage to the process, so you will get the opportunity to comment back on reviews that are taken on your proposals. And I have to say, just from my own experience, reviews coming from a very disciplinary silo are very easy to spot, and we have no difficulties in applying if a review like this can
Yeah, I suppose what I was really interested in was whether when you're writing a proposal, are you kind of consciously thinking, look, here are the audiences, there's going to be a kind of multidisciplinary panel, so they need to be able to understand. I need to make sure there's something there for the philosopher, there's something there for the neuroscientist, there's something there for the developmental psychologist. So maybe, is that something that you consciously make sure that you're kind of covering, so that someone who knows nothing about neuroscience will understand this bit about neuroscience, but on the other hand, a neuroscientist will think, oh, that's very interesting. Because I find it quite hard to do both of those things at the same time.
Yes, you need to do that, but you need to do it in a way that allows someone to read everything.
Right. Yes. Okay. So that's it.
I thought you said something very nice about it should read like an article, because I think we've all had experience of being on panels where it's sort of beautiful and you're being taken through and you're following and you learn something and you can feel that this has got a shape to it. And that usually stands out. But Andreas wanted to.
I think I agree with everything that you said, Sharon, apart from your evaluation of reviews. I think sometimes reviews can be completely lost and sometimes they're good, but I think what's critical there isn't really the roles of reviews, but the roles of panels. And I'm on one panel where in that particular panel organization, the idea is what the panel does is just to take an average of the reviewers and then give money to those who got the best results. Right? But then I'm on another panel where the idea is that we have to submit these reviews that they can be useful, but actually it's panel-based decisions. So there is no direct relationship between the kind of marks and the kind of reviews and the panels. So I guess that really depends on the kind of policy.
The AHRC is very much the latter case. I mean, and the panels often have this discussion when somebody who's not getting their own way holds up on a particular view and said, well, they gave it wrong, so why don't we just make it, reduce it? That people will say, we're not here to sum, and the AHRC always agree with that.
Do you want to say anything more about the role of the panel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the panel, because it's going to be an interview, and so the panel will get the reviews and your applicant response, and that will be kind of a precursor to the interview process. So they will be kind of going through this kind of a mixture of an assessment panel. They will be taking into consideration the reviews and taking those as experts. And they will, obviously we won't be able to have a panel that will be able to cover everybody. So they will be led by those reviews, but they will be using the skills of the normal panels to be determining when a reviewer has been kind of out of order, shall we say. And so that's essentially how that's going to work. So the panel will have seen all the reviews and the response prior to the interview process.
Okay, let's move on. Patrick.
Yes, thanks very much, Joelle. My question is about outputs and articles. So my understanding is that in the humanities, single author publication is normal, and in the sciences, single author publication is rare. And I just wonder if you have some comments about how you can ensure that the true value of an interdisciplinary collaboration actually shows, given that those traditions still operate.
Well, from what I understand, the institutions that are judging your output are sensitive to the fact that you are either in this tradition or that. But if there is, I think the interdisciplinary aspect will show up more in the, of course, the scientific papers will be multiple authored. Then you will see how far this project has performed as intended. Whereas it's true that if it's a book, for example, that is being authored by the PI, how can you know? Well, he can describe, though. That's part of what the scientific report is for. He can describe the influences he got from his partners to build the book, to write the book. The footnotes should reflect the contributions of the various other partners. So there must be some way of, and also a forward explaining that this was made possible and so on. That's a way also to pay tribute to the people who did not author it. But I think we can also think about co-authoring even across humanities. For example, I would very much want to write a paper with Maurice Bloch about epistemic relativism, because he has strong views against a certain way of conducting cognitive experiments about cognitive diversity. And I have strong realist views about epistemic norms, and so we can really team up to publish something, even though it's quite unusual to have a philosopher and an anthropologist. But I think that's what we are here for. We are here for attempting to make new forms of collaboration. So we are still at the beginning of something here.
I think that's right, and that's partly one of the possible transformative effects is that the result of working with teams, collaborating on joint publications with colleagues in the sciences, some of that has gone back into humanities, so that people, certainly in some disciplines that I know, have started to work in teams much more and are talking about writing joint publications because they've learned that the dominance thing has an asymmetry, maybe it's not less believed, that these rather dominant figures on the other side are often the ones who invite you or invite a philosopher, oh, we should write a paper together, and I'll send you the first draft and you comment on it and you say, goodness, it's already happening. Whereas the philosophers don't usually do that to others. And maybe not historians and maybe not the and so on. So it can change our practices because they are actually really rather good, I think, these days. Certainly the ones I know in neuroscience and neurobiology about taking an interest in an idea they've heard and saying, let's work on a paper together. And that kind of experience of jointly writing, which is hard but useful, forges a new way of doing interdisciplinary and team working, which I think you can take back in your own discipline. For the better, I mean.
So just to summarize, joint publication is actually desirable. It's something that this program would want to foster.
I think it would be very strange for the reciprocity if we ended up seeing people in the projects dividing up into the science side publishing here, humanities going on doing their own way. One would feel it was very difficult to find this really had been transformative.
Then we're up against the journals.
Absolutely, and I think the need for interdisciplinary journals is something which actually the research councils are very aware of and making quite a bit of noise about. I think the head of the AHRC, Rick Lyons, has been doing some collaborative work with New Zealand and find it difficult to find a place to publish and said there should be more journals that allow this to happen. And I think that's right. Well, that's also possible. Finding one, given how easy it is now to have online journals, and there are specialist bodies around there in the digital world and in the digital humanities that offer you resources to put such things together. You might think if you have a large team and if you have space and willing workers to think of doing that, if you really see the need for it. Yeah. Any further questions, or shall we? Well, let's draw it to a close there, but before we do, and before we take sort of 2 minutes for stretching, let's just thank Joelle very much for the incredible